Welcome to the Oh So Spurs Tactics Special. Alongside A-licensed coach JJ, we are going to be going over the Bodeglint game. Shall we start with the team selection before we jump into possession, Solanke, Johnson, Richarlison and the Bodegal? Because at the start of the game, Richarlison on the left wing, Johnson on the right wing had a lot of critical feedback. Do you want to talk a bit about maybe why Ange made those decisions and did they work?
Well, look, it's easy enough to say that they work because within 40 seconds we'd scored a goal, and all of the chat beforehand, I think a lot of people questioned the Bissouma playing. They questioned Richarlison playing off the left, and then they questioned. Well, there's a lot of people that question Brennan Johnson's value to the team, and then immediately within 40 seconds, you saw all three of those players have a key role in that first goal. Feeling when I saw the team sheet about an hour before the game was that we were going to do something slightly different. We were going to play with a more orthodox double pivot, which isn't something that traditionally Ange has done with Tottenham. And I felt we were going to try and tilt the field. So I felt that we were going to try and leave Johnson high and wide to provide a threat on that side. And then we were going to drop Richarlison a little bit. And he was going to be a little bit more of that kind of playing out option to hold the ball up. So we'd be able to knock the ball over the top to him to either hold out. We'd be able to do that from the goalkeeper if we needed to, but he was going to be out there to battle and fight and really, press and be a menace. And early on that first goal, we saw, people really upset about Bissouma being on the pitch. Well, the manager doesn't rate him, he hasn't played him, and then, he throws him into this game. Surely it's not going to work. Well, it did. And there's a player who was out there and he was super professional and he deserves credit for that. So we put on a high press, which is very typical of what we wanted to do, but we didn't do it all game. We got high up the pitch. We got players well engaged and locked onto their targets. Bissouma does really well after the ball's doing a bit of head tennis in the box to just ease his man out of the way, plays the ball out. And it's a delivery from Porro back to the far stick. And that's where Richarlison comes into his own. If that's Matisse Tel, he probably doesn't win that header. But Richarlison does brilliantly to get up, and he's really arching his back to get that header, and he puts it into a perfect area. So he doesn't try to go for goal. He doesn't head it backwards towards the penalty spot, which may have favoured the defenders. He pops it back over everybody. And there is everybody's favourite tap-in merchant. Right place, right time. And if you care to do it, please do go back, slow down the goal and watch Johnson's movement. It is a better goal than people are giving it credit for, more about his desire and commitment to get into that spot. He recognises what's going to happen before Richarlison gets onto that header, and he puts himself in position. We're 1-0 up, and all of a sudden the game is there for Tottenham to settle into, and it set the platform for us to play.
So another thing I noticed in that game was the fullbacks, wingbacks. Quickly, I think one of the biggest bits of feedback has been we need to commit those wingbacks less often. They need to invert less often. It leaves us exposed. And from where I was sitting in the ground, we would start the build-up and they would very consciously stop and look for a more central option. And it was almost like Bodeglint were trying to let us form that overlap and tempt Udogie and tempt Porro into those runs, and they would just stop and they wouldn't do it. Now, around me, there was a lot of anger and frustration about that, but I've also heard from the same people the anger and frustration when they do it. Was that a conscious thing? And do you think we're going to see more of that, and why? Why weren't we committing those bodies forward?
I definitely feel it was deliberate because it happened consistently across the 90 plus minutes. It was the fullbacks occasionally did get up, and certainly Udogie did get on his overlapping runs a few times across the game. Porro much less so, but Porro operates in a pocket of space where he is so dangerous. And I think that this little tweak, this, not necessarily sending both fullbacks flying up to get into a high press. We didn't do that for most of the game. We certainly kind of eased off into more of a mid block. We were perfectly happy for Boda to have the ball as well. Perfectly happy for them to play around at the back and rack up their passes without us committing to a high press. And then when we did have the ball, putting Porro into those positions in that kind of half space in between, Brennan Johnson being pushed high and wide and then on the side of the midfielders. So he's still inverting, he's still coming in, but he's such a threat with his delivery from there. And we saw that a couple of times in the game. So we see it for the first goal, played the ball to the back post for Richarlison, but we see it for the Maddison goal as well, where he clips a really lovely ball. He's driving on into that space where we'd expect him to go in that inverted position, and he clips a lovely ball into Maddison. And again, that's something they've been working on. The players and staff have said that, and we've seen it a couple of times in Europe. So it's a very deliberate switch to what we're doing in Europe, which is interesting. And no idea why that's not also being done in the Prem, but you can see that we are playing slightly differently and it's having the desired result.
So do you want to talk a little bit more about the impact that's had on possession? Because it was 23 shots to their 3. We only had 40% possession. We're at home. We were generating more chances than we were in games with lots of possession. What did you notice about that in the game?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's as simple as the coaching staff have taken a look at the way Bodo like to play their football, and they've said, we're perfectly happy with you having the lion's share of possession, which happened over the course of the game, but you, in effect, want to draw us on so that you can play counter-attacking, you can attack the spaces. They've got good rotations. We've seen that from their European games. And when they commit forward, they really do commit. They very often commit 4+ into attacks on the counter. They're a super dangerous side. They're well drilled and they know what they're doing. And therefore, we said, we're going to negate that. We're going to nullify that. We're not going to give you that opportunity to do it to us. And we've shown that we can be susceptible to it. So we did something different. We ceded possession. We sat in a different starting position. And then we were willing to play into the spaces. And we know that with this style of football, we can be a real threat as either a counter-attacking team or a faux counter-attacking team, which is where you generate scenarios when in possession that are almost like counter-attacks by drawing teams onto you. So we know we can do that really well. We did it really well. We probably should have scored more goals if we're honest with ourselves, but the stats are pretty, they're pretty convincing in terms of 24 shots to whatever it was, 24 shots to 3, I think it was, across the game. So we dominated in terms of shots. We dominated in terms of chances. That's what you want to see. You've identified how the opposition want to play, you've nullified it, and then you've system in and you've put the personnel in to take advantage. And we did that.
If you're setting up with a system that's working and putting yourself in a position to have more likely than not a win and goals and concede very few, which I think we did, you have to say 3-1 probably flattered. Clint, I feel we did enough to score 4 or 5.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we didn't do enough. We didn't score 4 or 5, but it felt like the opportunities were certainly there, and there were strong opportunities to have more goals and walk away of that to say, yes, we did get the 4 goals we needed. I don't want to finish on a negative with the goal we conceded, so let's start on the negative. It felt a bit familiar, again, in the sense that there were a couple of moments that felt avoidable from individual players that put us in a situation that didn't need to happen. Is that fair?
I would look at it slightly differently, and maybe it's because I'm in a positive frame of mind after the result. There's kind of 3 bits to the goal that we conceded, and there are bits we certainly could have done better, but you look at it in the round and they played that situation quite well. It was a very simple build-up. It's not like anything complex was done until the ball was in the penalty area. It was a very simple build-up. Ball played wide. There was an overlapping or slightly underlapping player. It pulls 2 players across. And then the ball is fired into midfield. And prior to everything taking place, they get the run of the ball. Okay. And that you can't really do much about. So they've got the run of the ball, but what they did with it is they dealt with it with quality. So they played a very quick punch ball through the lines. You can have a double pivot, you can have 4 players in there. But at the end of the day, a first time pass that's done with quality can get through any team. So they've executed that nicely. And then the lad who's in the box, whose name escapes me now, absolutely wonderful feat. He does 2 things. He throws a swerve, which sends everybody in the wrong direction. It's a really nice body swerve. And then he just rolls his studs over it, and it brings the ball back at the perfect pace, completely under control for him, so that he's got 1 step and then he can hit it, and he can hit it with his instep. So he does that absolutely brilliantly. That is great technical skill. That is a player who's in there, he's got himself into a good position, and he's done 2 things really nicely. And I really do feel for Bentancur, because he had a pretty good game across the whole. And for him to absolutely give everything to get a piece of that ball, and he does, but for it to bounce over the goalkeeper, pretty symptomatic of the way things go for Tottenham Hotspur. But I think he did well, and credit to the player for that. So you've got the quality of the execution by the individual, you've got the run of the ball, and then you've got the fact that sometimes if the ball is moved quickly and with quality, there is actually nothing you can do about it. So you add all of those things up, and we can be a little bit more generous on the goal we conceded. I know people will say it came through, that kind of defensive midfield position, but I wouldn't be looking at that feeling like this is a carbon copy of all the other goals we've conceded. It just felt like a well-executed goal with a little slice of luck.
I know you want to talk about Johnson's crossing in a bit more detail today as well.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. And again, these are points for improvement. So, Brennan Johnson comes in for a lot of criticism, and one of the areas is that he doesn't take players on. The other area, which I think is very valid, is his crossing. And this is something that I would definitely like to see an improvement for him. There weren't that many occasions in this game, but there was still a couple of opportunities where he fired it into the first man. Now, on the generous side of things, Brennan Johnson very rarely gives up possession. So when he gets the ball in high positions, he very rarely turns it over and allows a counter-attack. That's a positive. It's a genuine part of his skill set that the ball ends up going for a corner, kind of worst case scenario. So that's not a bad thing. But what we want to now see is better quality on that delivery. And because he's taking a bit of the responsibility away from himself. He's been told to whip it across the face towards the second post, and hopefully the player on the other side is doing their job. They're getting in there to tap it in. What I'd like to see from him is a bit more finesse. It doesn't necessarily mean he needs to be standing the ball up if that's not the right ball to do. But what I do want to see is sometimes you've got to shape it round the defender, and he's got to get better at doing that instead of hitting the defender. And then sometimes you've just got to look as if you're going to whip it across the face of goal, and you just slow the speed of your foot as it's coming through. So a defender is preparing themselves for you to absolutely bash it. You slow down the speed of delivery, and what can happen is you can then whip it through players' legs. It slightly changes what they're expecting from the ball, and it will change what then happens to the ball. He also needs to work on reversing the ball to the penalty spot. So identifying if someone is coming in and then just a little reverse pass into someone's path. Those are the little bits and pieces I really want to see from Johnson. Yes, he's got to take his man on more often, but there's a similar kind of link to Dom Solanke and his finishing. We saw an occasion where I think again it was Bissouma brilliantly broke down the play in midfield, nudged the ball forward to Solanke. He gets it off, he moves it onto his left foot, and then he kind of bashes at it. Again, we've been spoilt by seeing someone like Harry Kane as a finisher over many years, but I'd like to see a bit of variation on that finish. So don't just wind it up and hit and hope and hoping it's going in. We want to see, bobble finishes into the floor to lift it over the defender, lift it over the goalkeeper. We want to see, instep towards the second post. We want to see delaying that swing through where just that fraction of a second is enough for the defender to have committed to a tackle, and then it can fly through legs. The amount of times you see great strikers scoring through players' legs, it's a deliberate thing. This isn't by chance.
Interesting. From the outside, you don't realise that is a deliberate thing. You can be that good that you're playing the ball through someone's legs on purpose. But yeah, I guess when you're in such tight spaces, the margins are that tight, and you get paid all that money because you are the very few number of individuals that can pull that off. Yeah, that's really interesting. The other thing I want to just mention, you mentioned earlier again, just want to remember again, the term used for counterattacks, but not an official counterattack, when it's kind of other areas of the pitch, you're kind of luring in players and doing kind of mini false counters. I like that term. What was it called again?
I just called it a faux counterattack.
Counter.
Yeah, faux counterattack. This is generating positions on the football pitch that allow you to play as if you're on the counterattack, but you yourself might have the football. And I think the examples most people will be able to identify as, teams that play out from the back. So just rolling the ball across the from the goalkeeper to the centre halves and stuff to draw teams onto you, to create the positions to then effectively attack quickly.
Yeah, because that's what it felt like in the game. It was like, come on then, you want the ball, come and get it. And they're like, no, this is your turn to attack. You're meant to go so we can counterattack you. And it's like you're kind of turning it on its head. Mm-hmm. You're countering the counter to get a counter. There you go. Football's evolving even more. Was there anything else you wanted to add, JJ, or are we we wrap it up there?
No, I think we can wrap it up, but I'm feeling fairly positive today after that. I know the injuries are disappointing. Losing Berival, that didn't look good. But yeah, we should be coming out of that not fully negative and not criticising ourselves. We've come out from a European semi-final, 3-1 victors, so we should be looking positively at what we can do next week away from home.
And we're lucky, well, we're in a fortunate position where not many clubs can say, I've lost James Maddison, but I've got Dejan Kulusevski waiting to come on instead. You know, we got these depth situations. I don't have Lucas Berival, but I have other extremely good midfielders to bring on. So we should go into that game with high hopes. So we play like that, I think, the way we did at home. There's no reason to say, well, we can't get another goal or two, and then the tie really is dead. So, yeah, up the Spurs, JJ.
Come on, Tottenham.